Please welcome Jenks Farmer to the Epcot Fresh Stage with Country Plants, City Plants. Which came first, plastic pots or woodstock?
Thanks, y'all. It might seem like such a silly question. Thank you. But when something has become so ubiquitous that you see it everywhere, and we get so used to it, we forget to think about the time before we had that thing. You know, what was it like just 5 years ago before we had this thing? And just about 40 years ago, before we had these, we had a nursery industry. The whole world had a nursery industry. But we didn't have these. We didn't have plants in gas stations. We didn't have, for sale in gas stations or department stores. These made that possible. But there were lots of plants that we had, that we grew and traded and used in landscaping and horticulture that thrived without those, and some of them we've lost because they don't thrive in these black plastic pots. So I'm going to talk about those plants, starting with perennials, looking at shrubs and bananas and some bigger things like bamboo, and finally ending up with a giant bulb. And those bulbs are amaryllis, and in the amaryllis family, they're crinum lilies. But before I do that, I think it's important that you all know a little bit about me and why these questions are important to me and how I started kind of exploring them. About 5 years ago, I started writing down the stories of the people who taught me, who were country gardeners, self-taught country gardeners. And those stories kind of unintentionally became this book called Deep-Rooted Wisdom. So the book is really about skills, things that they taught me, things that have been forgotten, and how I use those in modern gardening, and how those things can be used in your modern gardening too, and should be used in your modern gardening because they're easier on the earth, take less resources, less energy, and make for beautiful, engaging gardens. The career that I had, though, was in public gardens, in building public gardens and showing off plants, and often in evaluating new plants. So I spent a lot of time looking at new plants, trying them, testing them, writing down that information, and then sharing it. But you know, in the last 5 years, if you pay attention to the nursery industry, you'll know that the rate of change in plants has increased dramatically. Like, we used to get a new coleus every year. Now we get a dozen every year, and that means that the ones from last year often go away. But that's the kind of thing that I did in public gardens, was to do the building, like literally putting the things in the ground. This is Riverbanks Botanical Garden in Columbia, South Carolina. That was it when we started. This is it last year. We have about now we have about 1 million visitors a year. And another garden that I'm working with currently, this is it in the 1830s, and that garden was the garden of Wade Hampton, who was a Civil War general. Or actually, it was a garden of his daughters. Keep your eye on that fountain that's in the middle in the distant view. That's a garden in the 1830s. That's a garden in the 1970s. We didn't take very good care of it. There is a blue arrow that indicates where that fountain would have been. But this organization that I work with doesn't have a lot of money, so we do things really simply. We use basic, old-school horticulture skills to make the garden much more beautiful. So we're just doing things like moving plants around. Lots of these are old plants that part of the garden was kept intact all through those years. So we're moving things that are overgrown. We don't even have the best tools, you know, and we're not always particularly safe. But we've made, I'm probably not supposed to show that. That's an example of what not to do. But this is what the garden looks like today. So we spent a lot of time getting the trees right. This is that same fountain that you saw in the original sketch. And I'm really proud of this garden. Downtown Columbia, it's open, it's free, you can stop in anytime. Now we're working on the herbaceous layer. So we've got the trees in, we've gotten the shrubs back, we've made big decisions about what we can put back and what we can't afford to put back. Like, you know, all the topiary stuff that I showed you in the sketch. We can't afford that. We don't have the manpower to do it. We don't want to use the chemicals to do it. And so we've made big decisions about how to renovate the garden in a style that's appropriate and which plants to use that tell a story. So one of those plants is Phlox Pilosa. And phlox is a plant that does well from Central Florida into, I don't know, Michigan. This is a little phlox. It's a really easy one to grow. And phlox, one of the problems that most phlox have is that they can get this downy mildew, kind of a white powder on the leaves. Well, the cool thing about the little ones is that they have little leaves, so they don't get much downy mildew. They do get it, but you don't really notice it. So that's Phlox Pilosa in our old garden in Columbia, in South Carolina. The question I have to address is how do we take it out of that setting that, you know, most of us don't have a cute little barn in the background and adapt it to a modern garden. So this is an example of a garden that I got called into in downtown. This is actually the oldest the oldest commercial building in downtown Columbia. So it had been a parking lot since the 1930s. And they called me in at this stage of renovation and said, hey, can you make this pretty? And, yeah, we can make it pretty, and we can do it without using all of the landscaping things that cost. You know, we don't need an irrigation system if we pick the right plants. We don't need synthetic chemicals if we get the soil right and alive. So that Phlox Pilosa is the basis. So that's the garden in the first spring after we brought in that Phlox Pilosa. And that's Phlox Pilosa in flower. In South Carolina, it flowers about May. In Central Florida, that would be much earlier. And of course, if you're in Indiana, a little bit later. So I think that's a great example of a very modern garden. It's still a parking lot. You know, it's nobody's home garden. The idea was to make it a place that accepted rainwater, so they didn't have to deal with rainwater runoff, and made it a little bit prettier for the people, the customers coming into a new business. Another group of plants that get left out in the cold are the old-fashioned chrysanthemums. We've worked and worked and worked and bred chrysanthemums into these little mounds, you know, that we buy last for 3 weeks in the fall, and they cost $15, and it's like, it's too expensive. When the old-fashioned chrysanthemums are completely perennial, they live for decades. One of the only problems with them is that they flop over. So in this old house, you see that this chrysanthemum, this lady uses her chain link fence and lets them climb over the fence and kind of cascade down, and it makes for a really romantic plant. And then a picture of how I use that same plant. So I took cuttings from her and stuck those cuttings directly in the ground in the fall. They all rooted, and they grew and became the border for a relatively modern garden. This is kind of a suburban garden. There are, the cool thing about these is that a lot of them have been forgotten. So you find them in old gardens and there's no trace in them, no finding their real name. So a friend of mine recognized this lavender, kind of purple lavender one, as unique and didn't have a name on it, and named it for the place that he found it, which was in my mom's garden, and the day that it flowered is Thanksgiving, so it's called Miss Gloria's Thanksgiving Day Mom. There's I'm not sure why. Oh, just an adaptation of that. You know, the thing that makes this modern to me, it's still a little old-fashioned looking garden. It's actually a modern garden that someone asked for, a flowy, romantic perennial border. But the color scheme is a little bit off. And I like it. I think it's a nice touch. It's very modern to have the lavender and the red together. So sometimes just looking for ways to make those things work in a new way is as simple as mixing them with something else that's very up to date. There's a whole essay on my website that you can download on chrysanthemums, and it's totally free, and it's how to find these plants, how to use them and propagate them, and how to mix them in to landscapes. This little tiny mum, this looks like a lantana from a distance, but it flowers in late October for us. Tough as nails, in a parking lot here with no irrigation. And the cool thing, the thing that I like it over lantana, is that when it flowers late in the season, it does flower late in the season, and chrysanthemums attract tons of insects. So they attract lots of pollinators, which is something that I like in the garden. But I like all the little tiny ones. I think that these little tiny garden mums fit into modern landscapes. They're a little bit more compact, and they're easier to work with in tight spaces and in containers. This is actually another example of wait a minute, I got a little lost there, of where a garden that I've been working with a long time. It's also a historic garden, also in downtown Columbia. This is what it looked like when we started, a nonprofit, a historical society. And we needed to screen off for rental purposes that big space in the background. We're going to make that like the caterer space for events. So the plant that we use is Chinese yew. So this is it about 2 years later. Chinese yew is a really common landscape plant. There's one behind me. But there are two really interesting things about Chinese yew, besides the fact that it does what you want it to do easily. One is that lots of people have it, and they have it looking a little weird like this, and they'll call me and say, hey, can you come in and plant some more in between these so that we get a thicker hedge? No, that's the expensive solution. Sure, I can do that and charge you for it. But here's the easy solution and the cheap solution, is that with Chinese yew and a lot of hedge plants, you just pull the branches down, you pull the other branch down, take some zip ties and zip tie them together, and lay it, being tied down like that, stimulates this plant to have vertical growth. So it's going to fill in all those holes. So anytime I plant yew, I do that. I pull down a few branches. So I would just plant, if I had plants like this and I was planting a hedge, I would plant them 6 to 8 feet apart. So that saves money from the beginning, and it just takes advantage of understanding how the plants grow. That was out in Epcot yesterday. Just to give you an idea about how adaptable the plant is. You see it's low. There's actually a dwarf variety. It's less than knee high. And then as you go out this garden today, as you go out this building today, keep your eye out to the right, and across the way you'll see these massive, 20-foot high rectangles of the same plant. The other thing about Chinese yew, I talked a little bit about this morning. I talked about plants that help build the soil. So farmers have known for a long time, soil biologists have known for a long time, that plants this is a peanut. Peanuts, beans, peas, all plants in this family have the ability to take nitrogen out of the airspace in the soil, to use it to fertilize themselves. We know now that they can not only do that, but they can provide that nitrogen to other plants. And we know that there are a lot of plants that we just never bothered to look at because they weren't food crops. We didn't really care about that. With food crops, we've done a lot more research. So Chinese yew is one of those that modern research has shown is a nitrogen fixer. So keep your eyes open. You'll never see a Chinese yew that's nitrogen deficient, that has yellow leaves. Or if you do, there's something else wrong. You know, maybe too much water or something else is harming that plant. Another of the big shrubs that I think needs a much bigger place in gardening, particularly here in Central Florida, are fig trees. So figs are really easy to grow. Mr. Robert Bowden, who was a speaker earlier from the Lou Garden downtown, says that as the pest problems with citrus increase, you know, we have to look at alternative, easy-to-grow fruits, and figs are definitely one of them. They make small trees, but there are dwarf ones, and they're so easy to grow and share. So that photo is in my mom's garden where she does rooting in a sandbox with a simple little micro-mist system. So she'll take a fig like this. You take this time of year, stick it in about that deep, and by May, June, you'll have a rooted plant that looks like that. And by the end of the summer, you can have a plant that's 2 feet tall. No plastic pots, no cost, nothing, just, you know, a little bit of simple knowledge. Now, granted, you might stick 10 of them and only get 2 of them to root, but who cares? It's not that much work to stick 10 of them, right? Another very controversial big plant are the bamboos. The aggressive bamboos get a really bad rap, in my opinion. They do take over. They do terrible things like what you see behind you. But you know, the truth is that often the problem isn't the bamboo, but that somebody gave it that chance to take over. By leaving their fields abandoned, by leaving a site abandoned, by harming a space and not taking care of it, not putting it back, you give lots of aggressive plants a chance to move in. There are lots of ways to deal with bamboo in modern gardens. I love this this is at an art museum in Dallas where the bamboo is totally contained. And you know, in urban settings now, we have all of these contained places that are hard to grow in because they're hot and dry and the soil is compacted. But that's an aggressive running bamboo that's contained by concrete. And this is actually doing something else. All through this bamboo patch, they put in metal posts about head high. You can't really see them in the picture. But this is actually a security planting. So there's a fence interwoven into that. And you'll see lots of bamboo out in Disney. This is down at the Marlins Stadium in Miami. Really beautiful planting of this black bamboo. But all through Disney, you'll see that they use lots of bamboos. They use them responsibly, and they have planted them in ways that they're not going to escape and cause problems. This is a little garden that someone asked me to help provide privacy from the work area, the barn in the background. So we built this raised planter. Just built it the cheapest way we could, out of concrete blocks. It's 3 feet tall, and 3 feet is the magic number for containing bamboo. If you want to keep it in check, you need a 3-foot high wall. You need, let me say that again. You need a 3-foot deep container. Because a little wall that's like 12 inches, that bamboo is going to go right down under and come out and cause problems. But it's not going to go down 3 feet and do the same thing. So this is it. You see our very small bamboo plantings mixed into that bed. And then this is the same garden looking directly at that barn about 7 years later. So it did exactly what we wanted to do. I want to point out the ground cover here is a little plant called sensitive briar. Sensitive briar is one of those plants that fixes nitrogen. It's a great lawn substitute. So it does have little briars, so if you're going to like go out and lay out on your lawn, it's not for you. But if you just want a place that looks nice and flat and green, sensitive briar takes care of itself. It's a native plant. They have little ones over at the Native Plant Society booth you can see when you're walking out. But the other way to deal with bamboo is simply to choose clumping bamboos. There are more bamboo species that clump than there are bamboo species that run. This is at the Jacksonville Zoo. I love this planting because they did the little bamboo fence. They have this clumping bamboo. And then that bamboo wall in the back is actually fake. It's basically it's a piece of tin, or like corrugated, some kind of corrugated tin from a home store, and they just painted it to make it look like bamboo. They have entire buildings at the Jacksonville Zoo that they've done like that, and it's really beautiful. I call bamboo the duct tape of the plant world. These guys are building a laundry drying rack in a monastery in Laos. I use bamboo for everything on our farm. We eat it, we build with it, we use it to prop up the clothesline, we use it to prop up the fence that's fallen down. It's the most useful plant. And I love this. I saw this in a public garden in Charlotte, North Carolina, where they took these pallets, and those are just cut pieces of bamboo that they've stuck into the pallets, and they use those for screens. So whenever they need to close off, say a walkway or a bathroom or some garden is under construction, they just move those pallets around. I thought that was very handsome, lightweight, easy to use. And then in the book, Deep-Rooted Wisdom, one of my mother's friends is a woman who came here in the early 70s. She was a refugee from Cambodia. And she taught me about using bamboo for structures and for art. She's the kind of woman that would not buy. She's never going to go out and buy a 4x4 at Home Depot to grow like some cucumbers up. So she's constantly using bamboo. So there are a lot of her structures in the book and lots of different ways to use bamboo for what I think are kind of beautiful structures. Although I have a friend who says my structures are high-tech redneck. So you got to take a little bit of what I say with a grain of salt. It may not be to your taste. Bananas, especially in central Florida and southern, they can be a problem plant. Just like bamboo, I mean, maybe not so aggressive, but they can really take over a space and crowd out your other perennials. So, but they're beautiful and dramatic. So we have to look for ways to bring them in, from those country gardens, from production farms. How do we use them in modern gardens? And there are a couple ways. One is to choose the same thing. You choose clumping or single stem bananas. Like this one, the genus on this is NCT. Garden centers carry this. These single stem bananas grow. This is a young one, but they'll get 15 to 18 feet tall. But when they flower, the main plant dies. So you don't have to deal with that. It'll die every couple of years, but it sends up new pups from the base. So one way is to choose these single stem bananas. Another way is to choose dwarf bananas. This is, I call this a lady banana. In this perennial border, it's about 12 feet tall, max. Now it does clump. I mean, it does increase in size, so it's one that you have to just dig up. Every year or so, we would just dig it up out this border, put the base of it back, and give the rest of it away. Banana, they're so easy to share. Somebody brought me a banana in this little red wagon, and I'm like, the wagon's not really doing anything for this 80-pound hunk of water, basically. But there's that banana. in the middle of summer, they hauled it over to me, and I used it in a garden I was working on. This is it at the end of that same summer. Again, no synthetic fertilizers. We're not forcing the growth on this thing. It's in the right soil, it gets good water, and that growth on that made this new garden absolutely beautiful and dramatic. I'm going to switch scale here a little bit. This yellow flower plant in the foreground is called Candelabra Bush, and it's from a big group of plants in the genus Senna, S-E-N-N-A. And they're really adaptable to, in South Florida, they're great plants. For us, they tend to be annuals. So we have to start them from seed and grow them through the summer to get a plant that's about head high, like this one behind me. But all through Florida, you have lots of different sennas. This is one that's been trained up as a small tree. There are shrubby ones that really cascade. So this is a plant, though, that can be used in almost any part of the country. It's really old-fashioned, but it's easy to get from seed houses. So Senna alata, Candelabra bush, close-up of its flower. You see its seed pods there, but it's also just beautiful in foliage. So, you know, even if you don't get all those flowers, it doesn't really matter. They're big, dramatic foliage. So even in Michigan or somewhere that has a short growing season, you could use this like you might castor bean, so that you get drama from the texture of the leaf. Does anybody know what, this is root identification class. Does anybody know this root? I'm going to move into bulbs now. This is one that I like, a really old-fashioned plant. It can be a little bit of a problem. Did somebody take a guess on it? I'm sorry? Taro. No, it's not taro. Actually, it has that black covering. It looks a lot like taro. This is 4 o'clock. 4 o'clocks, which grow as perennials here. They grow as perennials all up through the Carolinas and Georgia. But when you get into the Midwest, you would grow them as annuals. So you start the seeds now, put them out, and you'll get masses of flowers all season. So this is a white one in an old country garden. Whites, pinks, yellows are kind of the norm. But there are great new cultivars coming in. I love this. I don't even know what you call that color, like cantaloupe or something. We have to look at a paint chip to come up with a cool color name for this. I like this pale pink. And there's a new cultivar of 4 o'clock that has lemon yellow leaves. So I'm very anxious to try that. And this crazy looking thing, does anybody want that in your garden? It's a voodoo lily. I found this one on Daytona Beach. Like, it had just washed up on the beach with a bunch of crap. And I picked it up. It was a big old bare bulb. Took it home, and it flowered, I don't know, same summer. So that's the flower. Not only is the flower ugly, but it smells like rotten meat. Everybody's writing that one down. I mean, the nice thing is you can just cut that flower off. It only lasts a day or two anyway, but if it bothers you, you get rid of it. But the foliage of voodoo lily is really beautiful. Like a fat piece of bamboo, and then a big leaf, like an umbrella-shaped leaf. And there's a great planting of this, if y'all are from the area, at the Lou Gardens. One of my favorite plantings of this. I love that it's planted on a hillside, so that when you walk down a pathway, there are these big stalks and these big leaves that kind of tower over you, so you really get the effect of these voodoo lilies. But the other thing that I like about voodoo lily is that it has these little aerial tubers that form in the crotch of the leaf. You just pick those off and share them, and it'll grow a new voodoo lily, like in a year. And they're fast, they're fun. You can save that thing for a long time. I have these things rolling around my car a lot because I want to have them like to give out to people, you know. It's true. I'm not sure if y'all are laughing at me or laughing with me. I'm not sure. Oh, she has some in her pocket right now. Where'd you get her? So, I'd like to end up with a little bit about crinum lilies and a little bit about our farm in South Carolina. We're right near Augusta, Georgia, and this is us. This is what we grow. Crinum lilies in our fields are big, kind of monstrous things. It's definitely a family farm. This is my partner Tom and my mom Gloria, and we do this with interns or our only hired helpers. We're about 3/4 of an acre on a totally organic farm. It's my place to sort of stand on my soapbox and say, look, you can do it. We can make this beautiful. We can make gardening better. We can produce things, food and flowers from good earth, and we can continue to take care of that earth. So the way that we do things is no-till gardening. We use organic Bermuda straw as a heavy mulch, and we use things that start the composting process. So we inoculate with what's called compost tea, and we break down that straw in the field. It's like one giant field of compost. So we just roll that straw out. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the technique right now, but we just roll that straw out constantly. Not constantly, that would be a lot of work. Three times a year. So I have a crinum lily somewhere. These are the ones that you see most commonly in Florida gardens, and they're all over here. In the purple martin garden, I have to suit up. It's my requirement from my Disney host that if I'm going to use my saw, I have to put all this stuff on. Little hand puppet here. Has anybody ever used one of these? Me neither. It keeps you from cutting yourself if you're using a saw. And honestly, I asked for a machete because I work with a machete, but I was denied that. So I want to show you a little bit about crinum lilies, and I'll get back to the slides in a second. You'll see really nice, beautiful ones in, did I say that, in the purple martin garden? Have y'all seen that? Where is it? It's near something called the Cactus Road Race. So, yeah, there are a bunch of topiary cars and the purple martins. In the morning, it's full of birds. So if I bought that plant in a garden center, this is what I would do to it before I planted it. I just want you to see how rough I would treat it. Honestly, I would treat it worse, but I don't want to make such a mess here. Almost any plant that I plant, I learned that when you get a new plant, you hold it from about this level and throw it onto the ground as hard as you can. And that's what it takes to break those roots up so that it can best adapt. But I want to show y'all how we do propagation. And just a good example of using all of these really tough old plants and all of these methods that don't take a lot of technology. It just takes understanding plant responses. So with a machete, I would have chopped that up. Darn, I forgot my safety glasses. Don't media people, don't you? All right, I'm taking this off. So, with bulbs, you know those bloomin' onions that some steakhouses sell? You know how when you peel an onion, you have layers of leaves? Well, all bulbs are like that. So we do that. We just peel back these layers of leaves. And then I would use, if you can come up later if you want to get a close-up of how this works, but I would use sand. Just separate these leaves out a little better than I've done here. Drop sand down in it. And in a shady place, just leave that to heal. And the response is really similar to the response that we had with the Chinese yew. It's been damaged. We leave it lay in a little lopsided, And so in between each of these leaves, it starts to produce a new plant. So that's how we do things in the field. And then we have ways, of course, that we're trying to make it happen more quickly than you would at home, because I care a little bit about time and that time production. But you could go from this to this size plant. You get 8 or 10 of them in 3 or 4 years. So back to the question of how do we take these old-fashioned plants like crinum lilies that you normally today you hardly ever see them used. You see them in old places like this, or cemeteries or ditches, because they had a popularity heyday. The last one, like all plants, they ride waves. The last one was in the 50s. But how do we take them out of a place like that and incorporate them into new gardens where, not everybody has this much space? So we grow, like I said, we grow bare root, and we ship bare root for 2 reasons. It's easier for us. We don't have to, it's cheaper for us. We don't deal with black plastic pots, which are expensive. And it's easier to plant for customers, so you don't have to dig such a big hole. Here's a crinum lily in a modern perennial garden. This is a lily called Bradley, and Bradley is a small one, where crinum lilies have the reputation of being big, sprawly things that kill all your other plants, and they smother out the neighbors. Bradley is a little one that flowers about waist high. It's a really great color. So the other thing that we do is look for colors that appeal to modern taste. So we have crinums, and the crinum breeders around, and some really great crinum breeders in Florida, are looking to expand the range. So now there are crinums that are solid white to really rich reds. Bradley is that solid kind of modern pink. And then this is a little bit softer, a little bit more romantic color called Mauve Pond. It's also a small one. It flowers less than waist high on me. I'll tell you a couple things about it. The name is terrible, but that's my fault. Because in plant world, if you discover a new plant, you get to name it. I wish I had had more marketing classes before I named this plant. I found it on the pond of an old southern country guy. His name was Gene Moore, but he called himself Gene Mauve. With his accent, it was Mauve. With his accent, pond was pond, hence the name Mauve Pond. So that's a cool one, but there are some issues with lilies that I want you to be aware of. We now have kudzu beetles. Y'all have kudzu bugs? I know you do in Florida. What? Oh yeah, people wish that they had kudzu. No, you don't wish, because anything related to kudzu, these things eat. Now, technically, they don't eat crinum lilies. They just like to congregate on their buds. A little bit of planting information. This is a single plant, the kind of the size that we ship, going into the ground. It goes about 8 to 10 inches deep. And a few years later, this is a 300-pound clump. And that's my partner saying, quit videotaping and get over here and help us. So if you have clumps like that, the way to deal with them is with water. So you do that, basically get the thing tilted up sideways in its hole, and then with hoses, just use that to wash all the dirt off. And then to use a shovel or a machete or a saw to cut it down into smaller pieces. Again, you do see them in nurseries, but we ship bare root. But I recommend if you see them in a nursery and they're sold like this, or like these are actually grown by Disney, so their root stock was really good. It's been really well grown. It's not all tied up and constricted like that one on the screen. If you were to see that one, take a shovel or a spade and cut off all those roots so that it looks like the bulb on the right, and it'll adapt and thrive in your garden. Those are all the plants I have to talk about. I want to just end by saying that I was really lucky to have all of these mentors. I'm very lucky now to work with young people. The youngest guy working with us is 15. He lives right down the little dirt road. And if I count the years, from most of my mentors were born in the 1920s to the year that the young men that I'm working with now are going to work through. You know, it's like a really long span of time, and I feel like it's a really big responsibility because I'm the bridge between the good things that those older people did, passing down those good lessons, but also the mistakes that they made, and working with these younger people and try to figure out how we do it better. And I think we can do that through gardening and horticulture and produce plenty of nutrients and plenty of flowers and joy and still leave really healthy soil. Thank you very much.